So with that, Kim, please go ahead and begin your presentation. Thank
you. Well, hello, everybody. My name, as Tim said, is Kim Hofmann, and I'd like to welcome you to Cut Your Food and Labor Costs Now. What we're going to talk about today is, is how to start saving thousands without sacrificing quality in your food service operation. This is a topic I really do enjoy because I do a lot of consulting with schools and with long-term care facilities, and they both have a lot of the same needs when it comes to cost control. They're both institutions, lots of regulations. So this presentation pretty well came about from issues that I see in most of the places that I consult with. And I'm usually called in when there's lots of issues with cost. And usually it's not just food cost, it's often labor cost. It could be supply cost, it could be productivity. But today's main emphasis is going to be on how to save money on your food cost. Did you know the goal is in schools is to maintain a food cost, including the value of donated commodities, and labor cost, including fringe benefits, of no more than 80% of the revenue income, 40% for food, 40% for labor, or any combination. And this was from a book from Martin, School Food Service Management for the 21st Century. And I think that that's very interesting, and maybe it's because most of the places that I am called in for are ones that do have issues with their food or their labor cost. I'm also finding 80% is pretty tough to meet for a lot of school districts. I think if you can even keep it under 90%, you're doing pretty good. So what are some of the issues you're having with controlling your cost? Anybody have issues with their labor cost, their food cost, budgeting? These are all going to be areas we're going to talk about. Rising food costs, budget cuts, new meal requirements, participation challenges. The pressure's on as a school food service director. Your high costs are often blamed on food prices, your supplier, the food service director, the number of free and reduced meals. And when I first started this, when I was getting into food prices, I was a salesperson for a large food vendor. And I had a lot of people that were coming up to me and saying that their costs were high because of the cost of a case of green beans. And then I started working with these clients, and I realized that they were really struggling with really understanding what food costs were. So that's when this presentation started to be developed. It's usually not one thing that causes your food cost to be high. It's just not that simple. And food cost is a nickel and dime type of mentality. You have to pay attention to every penny, every nickel, every dime. It's usually not one glaring area.
Okay to have extra.
So here are some hints and tips that I'd like to offer you on helping control your food cost. So do you want to start saving thousands now? If you have 1 penny, if you can save 1 penny a meal and you serve 2,000 lunches a day times 180 school days, right there, that 1 penny that you can save will save you $3,600 a year, just 1 cent. Think of how easy you could cut 1 cent off the cost of your meal. If you can save 10 cents per meal, you could save $36,000 a year. That's just 1 dime per meal. And think of what you could do with that $36,000.
What did you hear about it?
What would you like to do? Would you like to hire more people?
Kim.
Kim says, you got to get over here right now. There's water running down the hall.
And I told her, I said,
I don't hear you now.
I was trying to mute the call, but when I was muting the call, it was muting myself. So I apologize for any background information or background noises that you might be hearing. Controlling food costs. Learn how to control all the important variables that affect food.
I just love because Robin is a very Christian woman.
Excuse me. We are dealing with being unable to mute the sound, and if those of you in attendance could respect and hear.
Okay, can everybody hear me now?
Yeah. I think what you needed to do was to punch in the organizer code.
Okay. Well, bear with me here. We're going to talk about the top 10 practices that can cause an operation to waste money in their food cost. Number 1, overproduction and waste. Number 2, theft. 3, menus. 4, standardized recipes and portion control. 5, production records. 6, purchasing practices. 7, inventory. 8, revenue. 9, unpaid food consumption. 10, labor cost. These are the top reasons for high food cost. And what I'd like you now is to look at these 10 and see if you could pick out what number 1 is and number 2, the number 1 and number 2 cost leaks in food service operations. And just take a second and write that down. How many of you guessed for number 1, overproduction? If you did, pat yourself on the back. Overproduction is the number 1 cost leak in food cost control. And number 2 is theft. So if you got 1 and 2 right, as I said, the back. So let's talk about overproduction and waste. If you're serving 250 students a day and you prepare for if you serve, it should be 150 students a day, and you prepare for 150, but the meal served is 140 and you have 10 left over. Have you ever done the math on that? That's $3 a meal times 10 is $30 times 180 days per year is $5,400 per year. That is just in overproduction. And where I really find that is a lot of people often use recipes that are scaled to 50, 75, 100, 125, etc. And they make the items based on what the recipe said. But if they only need 140 and they make the recipe for 150, what's happening to those 10 extra portions? If you have 10 schools, that would cost you $54,000 a year just in this overproduction. So one of the things I really encourage everybody to do is to really look closely at how much you're producing, what is left, and what you're doing with your leftovers. Also, when you're doing the overproduction, don't forget that's a lot of extra labor too. And we're going to talk about labor at the end if we have time. But in most of the schools that I work with, the labor costs are a lot higher than the food cost. And everybody puts their emphasis on food cost, which they should. But labor is a larger piece of the puzzle. So whenever you're looking at your cost, you cannot forget about the labor cost. Now, there are several ways to reduce waste, and there's 2 types of waste. The first is preparation waste, and the second is food student waste. And preparation waste is cooking too far ahead of serving time. You need to practice just-in-time or batch cooking. And you need to reduce the holding times because as you leave things on the steam table or in convection ovens or steamers, it decreases the quality and quantity. If you can reduce the holding time, your quality is better and the losses because food does shrink. Overcooking or burning a product, see that all the time. Failure to get all the product out of a can. Using a spatula. I've done a lot of work with schools and long-term care facility, and I find that there's usually 2 servings left in a can if you don't take a spatula and scrape it out. Excessive paring and cleaning of fruits and vegetables, improper storing of items not used, and that products spoil before you're using them. Plate waste. Do you do actual plate waste studies to show what is eaten and what is tossed? I encourage everybody to do that in each of their schools and to have everything that is offered that day. When that child, you can pull like every 5th tray, every 10th tray, and do a plate waste. What's left, what percent of it they ate. It's pretty amazing, and it gives you a real clear picture. I know you can look in the trash can, but doing an actual plate waste study gives you even more information as to what you should be putting on the menu and preparation, what students like, what they don't like. Discover why the items are tossed. Don't they like the taste? Portions too large, too difficult, or it's too time-consuming to eat, or they didn't have enough time to eat. Implement offer versus serve. I know you need to at the high school level, but think about it in your elementary schools too, because carrying out offer versus serve at all school levels can reduce plate waste by 10 to 20%, especially in the elementary schools. And remember, every time you throw food away, you're throwing money away. Pay attention to your leftovers. Schools are offering choice. That's kind of one of the disadvantages of offer versus serve. Often have an issue with overproduction. And some of the ways to get around that is to prepare just in time, use better forecasting, use your production records. Plan your use of leftovers. Use it as a choice the next day. Make it as a part of a dish for the next day. Leftovers should never be given to employees, and food should never go home with employees. And I'm putting explanation points after that because I can't tell you how many places I go into that this is a huge problem. And often most people aren't really aware of it. I personally have worked into places where there was issues of food going home with employees, and what happened was they were allowed to take leftovers home, and they would start then preparing extras so that they would have food for dinner that night so that they could take it home. And I also worked in a school district where it was more of a rural school district, and they wanted to take the scraps home to the pigs and to the animals, and it was like, oh yeah, sure. This was like my first or second year as a food service director. Well, it ended up again the same thing. They were making extra meals. They weren't just taking home the scraps. They were taking home whole meals. So really pay attention to what's being done with the leftovers, and that the food should never go home with the employees. Also on this leftovers, I've also worked with a lot of schools that what they do is they put the leftovers out, and teachers or staff can come after the serving periods and eat for free. Not a good practice. Strongly suggest you do batch cooking. The old way, everything was ready and on the steam table as the students came in. Today, batch cooking is the way to do. The quality of most foods deteriorates if it's held for long periods of time at hot or cold temperatures. Cook in batches as close as possible to the serving time. often your food quality complaints are due to preparing too far in advance, and often it's not due to the quality of the food. But before you start doing batch cooking, make sure you know how long it takes to cook a batch of food. Because if not, then often the food is not ready when the students come through. Number 2 is theft. Most people are pretty surprised to see that this is the number 2 cost leak when it comes to cost control. But most people don't keep in mind that food is money. Would you leave $5,400 by an unlocked back door? That's what you do. That's what happens if you don't put your food away as soon as your deliveries come in. I thought this was pretty interesting that studies indicate that 1 out of every 3 employees will steal from you. Food is the second most popular target for employee theft. Anybody want to guess what number 1 is? It's office supplies. In a study done by McGraw-Hill and the National Food Service Security Council, they revealed that 44% of restaurant employees regularly steal or pilferage something at work each day. But again, keep in mind, most people do not think of food as stealing. They would never steal a stapler, but they think nothing of walking by and taking a couple cookies. 35% take supplies for personal use, and 17% take merchandise or food. And the difference between pilferage and theft, in case anybody was wondering, pilferage is a few bags of potato chips. Theft is taking cases of food. So it's more a matter of amount. Theft also is not just food. It can be revenue. It can be time. So when people are taking advantage, not clocking out on time, taking longer breaks, taking longer lunch, that also can be considered theft, a theft of time. You need to have a system in place to track every item received and used. You need to make sure you do accurate inventories, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Theft by students, theft by employees, especially in your high schools, there's I see there's more of your grab and go, and people can just pick up individual items. I see a lot of problems with theft by students. Cameras has been a really good way of solving that. Also, how you set up your serving line, who's in there observing. Keep accurate and timely records and reports, and start making sure that if you put out 100 bags of or 100 granola bars, that at the end of the day, see how many granola bars you sold, how many are left, and if you have a discrepancy there, you probably have a theft problem. Lock storerooms, coolers, freezers, and back doors. Now, I work into a lot of places that they lock them at night, but they're open all day long. And what I find is very amazing is most of the people's back door is right, and where everybody goes out to take breaks is right there by the storeroom. And I've seen over and over again where people will grab, a juice or granola bar, crackers, etc., as they go out to take their break. Storerooms, coolers, and freezers should be locked at all times. What I see with a lot of schools is they unlock it in the morning when people get the products they need. They lock it back up, or they put cameras too for the storerooms, coolers, and freezers. But theft, unfortunately, is a big issue in most institutions, and it's something that every place I go into says, we don't have a problem with theft. And unfortunately, almost every place I work with has a problem with theft. So I just want to bring that to your attention, and that you may have a problem that you're not quite aware of, and to keep the storeroom doors, coolers, freezers, and back doors locked. One person in charge of the key. I've worked in facilities that everything's locked in the summer, but everybody and their brother has a key to the freezers and refrigerators. And when the difference between the ending inventory at the end of the school year and the beginning inventory at the beginning of the school year was tens of thousands of dollars. So there really is an issue here. And embezzlement by cashiers and food service employees is a widespread problem. I just did a real quick Google search yesterday, and there were pages of, when I put embezzlement by school food service, pages of articles where school food service, either employees or employees of the district or whatever, have embezzled from the school food service operation. My suggestion there is to eliminate the opportunity for theft. It was kind of like when my kids were teenagers. My whole goal was to keep them honest. I was that mom that stayed up every night, stayed up until they got home and they had to give me a hug, before they went to bed. And part of that reason was with that hug, you could easily tell if they've been smoking or drinking. They knew they had to give me a hug before they went to bed. So I worked really hard at keeping them honest. And I encourage you to do the same in your systems. Make sure your storerooms, freezers, refrigerators, and back doors are monitored and can be locked, have controls in place to keep people honest. And I have heard stories of staff taking out food, and they've taken the food, they've put it in black trash bags, went to take a break, or they went to take the trash out, they put it beside the dumpster. Then when they took the break, they put it in the trunk of their car. So I do encourage clear plastic trash bags for all your trash. This is an actual incident that happened to me last year. I was looking through production records of one of the schools, and there was a difference of 10 meals per day from what was shown to be used compared to what was on the, used or served compared to what was on the cashier's report. And the head cook's response was, well, it was only 10. Well, that 10 amounted to $5,400 per year. I was just pretty amazed at the attitude when their reports weren't matching the number of meals served and the money wasn't there, that it was like, oh, it was only 10. These nickels, dimes, each individual meal, each overproduced item starts adding up, and they add up to thousands. Number 3 is the menu. And the menu is the most important factor affecting your food cost, because the menu lets you know the foods for each meal, the amount of food you need, what kind of form you want it in, the quality of the product. It tells you the labor required, the skill level, what kind of storage, what kind of equipment, and what the customers like. When purchasing for your menu, you need to buy the right product at the right time, in the right amount, at the right price, in the right quality. I encourage, with an explanation point, everybody to cost out their menu. I am, again, so surprised when I start consulting with schools or long-term care facilities, and one of the first things I do is cost out several days of their menu. And often I find that they want to keep their food cost at, say, $1, but their menu's costing out at $1.25. So there is no way they're ever going to get their food costs where they want to be if they follow their menu. So put down in bold letters on a piece of paper, cost out your menu. You can, ideally, you have your whole menu costed out, and especially if it's a cycle menu, that shouldn't be that difficult. But make sure you know how much every single meal is costing you. The other thing when you're looking at menus is commodities. You need to plan your menus around your commodities, and you need to direct your staff to order commodity products. And often, I know with the major food vendors around here, they're identified on the order guide like with a shield. Nationwide, 15 to 20% of the food on a school lunch tray is government commodities. And currently, the commodity entitlement rate established by the USDA is 0.2325 per lunch. And the entitlement dollars that each district earns is calculated by multiplying the number of lunches you served in the previous year by the commodity entitlement rate. And that's one thing I did check on right beforehand, because I've been in several schools and they said that the commodity entitlement rate was just based on the number of free meals served, but no, it is based on the total number of lunches served per year, which, and we'll talk about this pretty soon, why it is so important to get as many reimbursable meals served as you possibly can and convert some of this a la carte sales to reimbursable meals, because each time a student just buys a la carte and chooses not to buy a reimbursable meal, you're basically tossing away 50 cents. When you look at the federal reimbursement, federal state reimbursement, and the entitlement rate. Next is standardized recipes and portion control. Portion control means giving a specified quantity of food for a definite price and obtaining the number of servings planned from a given recipe. When food cost is high, one of the main reasons may be lack of portion control. Serving portions that are too large are frequently the case, and this was from School Food Service Management for the 21st century. And this is also something I see all the time. Portion control, the scoops are, instead of level, instead of it being a half cup serving, if you really look at it, it's 3/4 cup serving. I've been in schools where the cook that's behind the serving line, or the server, was deciding based on, Johnny's, going to basketball after this, and was giving them huge portions, and the server was making the decision based on the child what the portion should be. Not a very good practice. Incorrect portions add up fast too when it comes to portion control. If your staff doesn't weigh your meat portion, say you have chicken salad and it calls for 5 ounces, you give them 6. If you over portion this way every day for one meal a day, say it costs 30 cents per ounce. If you have 200 sandwiches times 30 cents, it's $60 a day. Right there times 180 days is $10,800. That's just money that you waste, because often these kids also toss that extra amount. I encourage everybody to use standardized recipes. And a standardized recipe is a recipe that is tried and true, and it's adapted to your operation. When I work with a lot of schools, I find that the majority of the recipes are standardized, but I've worked in operations where it's been in Mary's head. Not a good practice. Standardized recipes give you a consistent food quality, a predictable yield, increased customer satisfaction, consistent nutrient content, helps you with your food cost, helps you purchase, helps you with inventory, with labor, increased employee confidence, and reduced record keeping. When standardized recipes are not used, costs are negatively impacted. And one of the other things I've noticed too is I was in one of the schools I used to work with. I had a cook that loved garlic, and she put in how much garlic she thought, not whatever the recipe called for. And she thought the product was great. What do you think the students thought of it? Not too good. Had another example where it's not good. Those of you that are school food service directors, if you get a call from a principal and they say, "Hey, Kim, come on over, you got to see this." You kind of are guessing this is not going to be, a surprise party for you or something. It's going to be something pretty interesting. And I walked into one school, and in fact, this person's name was Sarge, that was the food service manager at that school. And as you're walking down the hall, you'd hear, "Kim's here, Kim's here." so everybody, knows you're there. And I go looking at the tray, and it was lasagna, but it was like pinkish white inside it. And they're like, I followed the recipe. Anybody want to guess what they did? Well, instead of following the recipe that called for tomato paste, they used tomato soup in the lasagna. So you can kind of guess how that recipe looked. Standardized recipes. If additional ingredients are added or the recipes are portioned incorrectly, the costs change. I was speaking for DMA about 5 years ago, and I think it was Campbell's that was doing a demo before I got there, and it was on cost control and portions. And these were all dietary managers, and they were all assigned to a table with a recipe, and the ingredients were there. And I think the recipe called for 3/4 cup of cheese. It was all, made to like 6 servings, 8 servings, something like that. And the amount they were given was a full cup. Every single table of those dietary managers added the entire amount of cheese. Not the 3/4 cup, they added the 1 cup that they had. And again, these are dietary managers, and we were in a presentation where there was demos and they were talking about it. So do not assume that additional ingredients are not always added. Standardized recipes are the same no matter who prepares the recipe. So even if somebody is out sick, the food to the student is consistent, that they know what they're going to expect on any given day. Standardized recipes need these 9 items. They have to have the title, the category, the ingredients. And by ingredients, you need to specify if it's as purchased or edible portion. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, but that's critical because if you're, the difference could matter 40% in the yield of a recipe. The cooking time and temperature, the directions, the weight and volume of each ingredient, the serving size, the recipe yield, and the equipment and utensils that need to be used. If you increase your ingredients, even 5 cents, that right there is $1,800 per year. So you add just that little extra chicken or that little extra amount of cheese. But those, as I said, when you look at cost control, it's nickels and dimes and pennies. They really add up. When you're also looking at portion size, make sure you cut the pans correctly. A pan that's cut 5 by 5 will yield 25 servings, say at 60 cents a serving. But if you cut that pan 4 by 5, it'll only yield 20 servings, 75 cents a serving. And the difference is 15 cents a serving, and you do the math on that, times 200 servings times 180 days. Right there is $5,400 a year. They said little things add up. Serving too large of a portion increases the chances you're going to run out of food. And when you run out of food, the students are unhappy and your food costs go up. You need to adjust your recipes for the production needs. And right to the right is an article that I took from the Executive Update from your magazine, from the CSI's magazine, that on page 13 that talks about sizing your recipes. There's different ways that you can do it. But these small changes can really add up. And then, as I mentioned before, make sure you understand the difference between AP and EP. AP means as purchased. EP means edible portion. And the difference has a huge impact on cost because bone, skin-in chicken compared to diced cooked chicken will have a major difference in the yield. There's a book called The Book of Yields, and I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it gives you up-to-date information and helps you with your accuracy in your purchasing and your costing.
I couldn't do it.
The next area is production records. And here's the definition of production records. And bottom line is you need to keep production records in all the schools. And that's pretty well required for schools. As I said, I do a lot of work too in long-term care. There has not been one long-term care facility that I have worked in that has done production records when I first walked in the door. Now, when I leave, they're all doing production records, but I always found that pretty interesting, especially when you're using a cycle menu. And here's some samples of some production records. It is a very important tool in cost control, and I find its value is especially with cycle menus, because when that menu comes up again, if you made 100 servings of something, cycle 1 Monday, and you had 80, you used 80, then you know next time you need to reduce that quantity. It helps you with the forecasting. Make sure on your production records, though, that it includes what was done with your leftovers. I find that they'll show leftovers and they may put freezer, but I'm not seeing where they come back out again and are used. And as I mentioned, the number 2 cost leak is theft, and leftovers is a big area of theft. So make sure your production records include what you've done with your leftovers. It's important that production records are complete and you do them at the end of each day. Don't wait a week to try to figure out your production records. Number 6 is purchasing, and it's a balancing act. If you overpurchase, it ties up your money. The food can deteriorate. There's a risk of theft. It takes money to buy that food, and storage can be an issue. And if you underpurchase, a lot of trips to the grocery store, and those trips take up labor because that person that goes to the store, their cost, plus the cost of the person that's filling in and doing that person's job. And often you don't receive the same price or the same quality from a retail store. Know market trends in pricing. Know the price of frequently purchased items and buy those accordingly. You can request current pricing or notification of changes from vendors, monthly on your staples, your groceries, your chemicals, bread and dairy, and weekly on your meat and produce. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Food Consumer Price Index, and it's updated monthly, but it kind of gives you the changes in the food prices, and it forecasts what's expected to go up, what's expected to go down. This was the most recent one. All food in 2014 is expected to go up 2.5 to 3.5%. And it looks like everything except for cereals and bakery products. I thought was kind of surprising. Is supposed to go up this year. This I wanted to share with you because I mentioned earlier I was in sales for a major food vendor, and I learned this one, that I used to believe that it was smart to cherry pick from vendors, and I did bids every month, and I had vendors, price everything out. But I learned when I worked for this food vendor that buying from many vendors was not the best way to get the lowest price and save money, because the more vendors you use, the more you pay, because there are often price points and delivery cost. Even other than that, it costs you money to place every order. It costs you money and time. And shopping around to save that 1% may actually cost you more. Purchasing takes time. You got to place the order, you got to receive the order, and you got to process the order. And accounting's got to pay for the order. And time is money. If you normally have 10 deliveries a week, it takes you 2 hours per order, and that's looking at your inventory. What do you need? Placing the order times $10 an hour works out to about $10,400 per year. And if you can reduce that in half, you can save about $5,000. I don't know how many of you are involved with GPOs or prime vendor savings, but you can often save money if you are in a group purchasing organization, and a lot of schools are already part of them, but I've worked with several food service operations where the school was part of a group purchasing organization, but the food service wasn't involved with it. So I encourage you to check to see if you're involved with any prime vendors or group purchasing, and look into those if your school is involved with it, because you can save time and you can save money, especially because they've been out and they take care of all the bidding. So here was just doing some math on that, and you can save about $6,000 to $18,000 per year was the average savings I found when I moved some of my accounts when I was, they said, working for that food vendor onto a group purchasing organization. Another myth is buying improperly is the single largest reason for the high food cost. As I said in the beginning, the main reason is overproduction. And number two, what? Theft? Yes. So the other point, another myth I found was I know my delivery people. I don't need to check in my orders. People make mistakes. Make sure you get what you paid for. Check the dates, the prices, the quantity, and the quality. And don't allow vendors to restock your bread, your milks, your chemicals, etc. And if you do, spot check that every once in a while, because most people are honest, but every once in a while you'll run into one that isn't. Also, too, with most of your main vendors, you don't have that many errors on your invoices. They've done the extensions okay. Some of your smaller, like fish vendors, specialty type vendors, I remember attending a seminar where it was talking about a fish company. On their walls, a list of those people that had scales and those people that didn't. And they knew who didn't have scales, and they would pack things accordingly. Also, too, with the same fish company, they were charging people for the ice. So when they were weighing things in, it included the weight of the ice. Food yields. A bargain may not be such a bargain if yields are much less than anticipated. And the purchase price per unit is not the determining factor. The determining factor is how many edible portions are produced and served. Your food cost. To figure out your food cost per meal is your food cost divided by the number of meals served. And this is a place I'm working with now, and their food cost was $2,910 for that month. They served 3,340 meals, so their food cost per meal was 87 cents. I encourage those of you that are food service directors to make sure you know your food cost per meal at every school and at the district level. But here's something interesting. A lot of people base their food cost on what they actually purchased. And that tells you your food purchased, not your food cost. To get your food cost, it's beginning inventory plus purchases minus ending inventory to get your food cost. And here's an example of, say you have $35,000 as a beginning inventory, purchases $120,000, cost of food available $155,000, ending inventory $25,000. Your cost of food used was $130,000. If you just used purchased, you would think your food cost would be $120,000, but it's actually $130,000. And you're going to be off by 8% or almost $10,000. And that often will not appear really noticeable for several months. Back into checking in your deliveries, too, I wanted to make mention, too, on when I forgot one point about allowing delivery people to stock items. One of the reasons why I said that, and a lot of these are just stories, incidents that happened to me, I ended up having a bread man that wasn't very honest, and he was in cahoots with one of my cooks, and he'd be bringing in the racks of bread and put them in, and he was taking up food on the very top of the cart. So unfortunately, that happened to me, so I just wanted to share that with you. Another thing is, another myth is convenient foods are always more expensive. That's not always the case. The key is to have a consistent quality. I find that nowadays I don't see near the actual preparation of foods, the scratch cooking that I saw 20, 30 years ago, though there does seem to be a move to bring that back. But you need to do the math, and you really need to look at the skill level of your cooks. Do you have the time? What is the labor cost? Because as I mentioned in the beginning, labor cost is often more than food cost. And this is an old example, and I didn't have access to current prices to change it, so bear with me when you look at some of the prices. But if you were looking at iceberg lettuce, if you're looking at head lettuce and comparing it to the bags of tossed salad, say lettuce is $21.35 at that time, and that was 24 heads, and it weighed 44 pounds, and tossed salad was $17, and it was 20 pounds. Now, if you just look at that first line, that seems like a no-brainer. Oh, wow, for $21.35 I get 44 pounds, and I'm only getting 20 pounds for $17. But keep going on. So then your cost per pound is 49 cents compared to 85 cents. But here's where it starts getting interesting. The yield after cleaning your head lettuce, once you take out the outer leaves and you take out that inner core, there's only about a 56% yield. And that's when I mentioned that book of yields a little bit earlier. That has all those figures of the average yield of products. So after cleaning that iceberg lettuce and stuff, 44 pounds, you have 25 pounds. And the tossed salad, you still have the 20 pounds. So your cost per usable pound now is 86 cents in the iceberg lettuce, 85 cents for the tossed salad. You throw in labor. Your cost per pound for the iceberg lettuce is now $1.04 compared to 85 cents for the tossed salad. That's why I encourage you to do the math. Again, you need to make the decision on what product works best for your facility. But do not just use the actual cost of the product. Get down there and figure out what it's actually costing for an edible portion. When you're also looking in that lettuce, keep in mind it's easier for your cook style, that should be 20 pounds, to lift 20 pounds of a salad mix compared to 44 pounds of the head lettuce. The salad mix takes less storage. When you're using the head lettuce, you're tossing 44% of it. There's no guarantee what's in the middle of the head lettuce. And safety. I used to do this when I was doing this presentation. I would do it as a demo, and I would have somebody pour the lettuce into the bag, and on the other side I'd have a table, and it was set up, and I had somebody out there cutting the lettuce, pouring it and cutting it and putting it into a bowl. And I did that until somebody cut their finger. So got to remember the workman's comp and the safety issues too. So I'm not on a commercial here by any means for using the tossed salad, but to me it's a good example of how you really need to do the math to figure out what the edible portion cost is, what it actually is costing you for the portions. Next, inventory. You need a good inventory system. And it's best to do a combination of your physical and your perpetual inventories. Physical inventories are required monthly, but I encourage a perpetual inventory of your more expensive items. Inventories can be time-consuming. One of my suggestions is to use vendor inventory software because they have the current prices, they do all the extensions, and it will save you a considerable amount of time. So I encourage you at least to explore that area. It doesn't take that much time to set up because they have all the products that you ordered. You can add in any other products that you bought from other vendors and put the prices. You can organize it by how you want to take it inventory, by storeroom, by freezer. And then all you have to do is put in the item amount. It does all the rest. And most of the vendor software then will give you a lot of charts, graphs, information. What percentage was meat, what percent was produce, how does it compare month to month, month to year, a lot of very valuable information. And I'm really surprised on on how few facilities I work with do take advantage of that software. Now, I do have to, an issue is if you do change vendors, then you have to reset up that software. But for the time savings that having that software there to be able to use every month, it is well worth it. Revenue and budget. Revenue usually comes from 5 sources in school. So it's cash payments from your customers, your subsidies, your state subsidies, your interest earned, and any additional revenue. And your additional revenues, your a la carte sales, your daycare meals, your Meals on Wheels, some do vending, special functions, catering. Here's a little note, and this was from School Food Service Management for the 21st century. None of the revenue sources should operate at the expense of your food service program. Any profits can be used to subsidize the meal program or assist with the purchase of equipment. I've worked in a lot of places where their labor contract has said that all catering is done at time and a half. And when you add in the true labor cost, which is not just the cost per hours, but the cost of the benefits, you end up, nobody can afford to do any catering in that school. Also, I've worked with a lot of facilities that when they do catering, they don't include labor, or they just put a minimal charge on labor. If you're doing catering, you need to make sure that you know what it's actually costing you per labor hour, including all the benefits and the taxes, etc. A la carte, make sure you price the items correctly. Pre-cost your item. Make sure you include labor cost when you're looking at how you're pricing the a la carte items. Know what your competition's charging. You should have a profit margin in mind that you can apply to the either to the items or the groups of items. Know how much a customer is willing to pay. Most customers are not willing to pay $2 for a 4-ounce container of yogurt, and it's often helpful to group like items with the same price. It makes it easier for the students to know what the price is, and it makes it easier for the cashiers. Remember that a la carte should not be in competition with the lunch program, and this is an issue I see with a lot of schools I consult with. They've made a huge emphasis on the a la carte program instead of their reimbursable meals. And please keep in mind that if a student purchases a la carte instead of a reimbursable meal, that your school's losing per meal. And that's when you look at the reimbursement and the commodity entitlement dollars. You need to know more about your department's expenses than anybody else. You need to be able to speak intelligently on all the financial aspects of your department. And you need to understand all the financial statements and know how to make the changes. You need to know your budget. You need to know your goals. You need to know how that budget was determined. You need to look at last year's budget and this year's forecast. You need to look at what equipment you're going to need, what repairs you're expecting, what miscellaneous charges have been charged to your department, any capital expenditures coming up. You need to be aware of the food, labor, and supply cost and know your total cost per meal served, food, labor, and supplies. And I am amazed when I go into facilities, into schools, and I ask them what their food cost is per meal, what their labor cost is per meal, most of them, and what their total cost is per meal. Most of the directors really don't know. So I encourage you to really get in and know your figures. Know if there's going to be any changes in the union contract, if you are unionized. Be aware of the economic conditions, and also be aware of the competition for labor, what's going on in some of the other similar industries. Know how many meals you serve. Determine meal equivalents. I find the easiest way, to determine lunch meal equivalents, is take the a la carte sales divided by the price that you serve, that it costs for a lunch. The main thing when you're determining meal equivalents is to be consistent throughout the year, so that you're not using one figure one time and one figure another time, but be very consistent. know where all your revenue is coming from. You need to be an accounting detective. You need to know where your money is going. One of the things I saw in the School Food Service Management Journal is, and we mentioned before, is that food and labor should be 40%, or labor should be 40%, food should be 40%, supplies about 5%. And I find that if you can keep around those percentages, you may be 35% for food, 45% for labor, but keep all your costs. The goal is 80%. I'm saying 90% even. Then you should be in pretty decent shape with your food service operation. But unfortunately, and I'm finding it's more even labor costs that are jumping. I'm worked with one school that their labor cost was 75%. So it's almost impossible for them to get to a break-even point. And unpaid food consumption, allowing staff to eat in the kitchen or take food for breaks can lead to a major dollar loss. If you have 6 employees who eat every day at no charge, $3 per day cost a meal costs $3,230 a year. Or if you happen to be missing 4 portions at $1.08 per portion, that's $1,577 per year. So, as I said in the beginning, it's nickels and dimes. It's these little things that really add up. And I'm looking at the clock right now, and I'm just going to touch base real quick on labor and then kind of finish up. But labor cost, as I said before, are usually one of the highest costs in a food service industry, or in the school food service, really about in any food service industry. There's a lot of factors that do affect your labor cost, but you need to take the time to really understand what your meals are per labor hour and what it is costing you. What is your true labor cost? And your true labor cost includes all the benefits, all the taxes, the paid time off, the break. And that could add 20 to 30% to an hourly rate of pay. I worked with one school district, and there were 10 schools in that district. 6 of those schools in that district were paying more money for benefits. We're not talking wages. We're talking benefits than they paid for food. So these are major expenses. You need to look at your real cost per labor. And you need to remember, this is an issue that I'm seeing in a lot of schools too, Parkinson's law. Work expands to fit the time available. That back 30 years ago, there was a lot more scratch cooking, there was a lot of baking, and most of the schools were staffed at very similar staffing ratios than they are today. I mean, today they're saying between 17 and 21 meals per labor hour if you're using convenience foods and not a satellite operation is a guideline, which was about what it was 20 or 30 years ago. Pay attention to your overtime cost, and your overtime should not exceed 2% of the productive hours paid. And the result of overtime is often, or the reason for overtime is usually poor planning. And to figure out your labor cost per meal, it's labor cost per day by meal served.
Hi.
So
How are you?
that's the formula.
A webinar.
And I encourage everybody to take the time and really look at your labor cost. And as I said, labor is a whole seminar on itself, but don't forget about labor when you're looking at your food cost. So I know that's a lot of information in an hour. It's a fascinating topic. I encourage everybody to get back into your facilities, start applying this, pull out the calculator and the pencil and see really where you're standing, where those nickels and dimes and quarters are going. And I want to thank you so much for spending this hour with me. And if anybody has any questions, you can either type it in that chat or you could, here's my email. It's kim@gettothepoint.com. Please feel free to send your question to me and I'll get an answer to you. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kim. That was a great presentation, very informative with a lot of thoughts and ideas, which I would think our participants may have some questions to ask you at this time. So I don't see anybody indicating in chat that they do, but is there anyone here that has a question for Kim? I'm sure. Anybody want to speak? Otherwise, you can email Kim and ask her any questions as a follow-up. Did have some people from the last session that Kim did follow up with some requests for information, so you're welcome to do the same. Unless there's anybody who wants to speak up, I think we're coming to an end. Can I get a copy of your presentation?
I would be glad to send you the handouts from this presentation, but I can't give you the PowerPoints. But I would be more than happy to give you the handouts.
Okay.
So just email me with your email address or how the best way to get in touch with you, and I'd be glad to work with you on that.
Kim would also be available if anyone is interested in doing an in-service training. So we had some people inquire about that yesterday. So that's another possibility, as she does work with a number of schools. Any other chat questions or questions verbally? Going once.
Well, again, thank everybody so much. Your time it's very much appreciated.
Thank you very much, Kim, for a very good presentation.
Thank you, Kim.
And we'll bring this to a close. And thank you all for attending. Bye-bye now.